I was about to speak a word that could save a man's life or end mine. My hand trembled just enough to rattle the wine bottle against the rim of Alberto Romano's glass. From across the dining room, it looked like nerves. Up close, if he actually heard what I was about to say, it was a death sentence. For me. For the secret I'd carried my whole life. Maybe both. Anything else I can bring you gentlemen this evening? I asked like my throat wasn't closing around every syllable. Fabio Romano checked his phone, the glow casting shadows across the scar near his temple. Behind them, the city spread out through floor-to-ceiling windows, Milan at twilight, all amber lights and old money, a world that had never been mine and never would be. 15 minutes earlier, I'd been in the staff locker room, hands shaking as I changed into my uniform when Carla burst through the door, makeup smudged, eyes wild. "Annie, you have to take my table." I'd frozen, one arm through my sleeve. "What?" "No. I can't. Table 12. The Romanos." Her voice cracked on the name. "I can't do it. Please. If this story makes your heart race, show us some love with a like and share it with someone who believes in second chances and drop in the comment where you are watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us hope and love. Everyone knew what it meant when the Romanos came to Osteria del Vento. The restaurant didn't just stiffen. It stopped breathing. Management moved like they were defusing a bomb. Waiters drew straws to avoid their section. Tips didn't matter when you were dealing with men who'd built empires on fear. "Carla, I'm not. You're the only one who hasn't served them before," she'd said, gripping my shoulders. "They won't remember you. You'll be invisible. Please. Invisible." That's what I'd always been. What I'd needed to be. But when I stepped onto the floor and saw him, Alberto Romano, patriarch of the family, silver-haired and silent, seated like a king in exile, something inside me fractured. I knew that face. Not from the restaurant. Not from newspapers or whispered stories in the kitchen. From my mother's hands. From the photo she'd kept hidden in a jewelry box I wasn't supposed to touch. The photo of a younger man with the same iron jaw, the same heavy-lidded eyes. The man she'd called Il Sopravvissuto, the survivor, before she stopped talking about the past altogether. Before she died cleaning other people's houses, lungs full of chemicals and heart full of buried things. "Move, Annie," the floor manager hissed, jerking his chin toward the table. I walked. Each step felt like wading through deep water. My pulse hammered against my ribs, drowning out the soft piano music, the clink of silverware, the hum of wealth pretending to be casual. Fabio Romano noticed me first. His gaze flicked up, cataloging, dismissing. I was nobody. Exactly what I needed to be. But Alberto didn't look up. He stared at his untouched plate, fingers drumming once against the white linen. Slow, deliberate, like a man waiting for something he knew was coming. I approached, set down the wine bottle. My reflection wavered in the polished silver. And then I made a choice. Not the safe one. Not the smart one. The only one I had left. I leaned in just enough that only Alberto could hear me, voice barely above a whisper, and spoke the word my mother had made me memorize when I was 7 years old. The word she said I must never forget, even if I never understood why. One word. Old Sicilian. Sacred. Contentizza. Gratitude bound by blood. Alberto's fork slipped from his hand. The sound of metal hitting porcelain echoed like a gunshot. Across the table, Fabio's head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing, jaw tightening. The floor manager took a step forward. A security guard's hand moved toward his jacket. But Alberto Romano, the man who'd ordered cities burned and empires built, who hadn't bowed to anyone in 50 years, slowly lifted his eyes to mine, and I watched the blood drain from his face. The silence that followed felt alive. It crawled across the dining room, thick and suffocating, choking the murmured conversations at nearby tables. Crystal glasses stopped mid-toast. A waiter froze with a tray balanced on his shoulder. Fabio stood slowly, chair scraping against marble. His voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. "What did you just say?" I couldn't answer. My throat had locked. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them against my apron to still them. But Alberto raised one trembling hand, palm out, a silent command. "Stop." Fabio obeyed instantly. The security guard stepped back. The manager's mouth opened, then closed. Alberto's gaze never left mine. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, broken. "Where did you learn that word?" I swallowed hard, forced the words past the knot in my chest. "My mother taught me." His eyes widened. Just barely. But enough. What was her name? The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen noise had stopped. Somewhere in the distance, a phone buzzed, ignored. I said it clearly, loudly enough that everyone would hear. Lucia Tapia. And Alberto Romano, legend, patriarch, killer, began to stand. Time stopped. Or maybe it stretched, pulling each second into something unbearable, each heartbeat loud enough to fill the space between us. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The wine bottle was still in my hand, growing warm against my palm. What did I just do? The thought screamed through my head on repeat, drowning out everything else. I'd broken the one rule my mother had drilled into me since childhood. Stay invisible. Stay quiet. Stay alive. And I'd just spoken a word that should have died with her. Fabio's chair scraped against the marble floor. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. He stood slowly, deliberately, the way predators move when they've already decided how this ends. His eyes locked onto mine. Dark, calculating, empty of anything resembling mercy. "I asked you a question." His voice was soft. Too soft. The kind of quiet that made your survival instincts scream. "What did you say?" My mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Answer him." The floor manager appeared at my elbow, face pale, hands wringing together. Sweat beaded at his temples. "Miss Tapia, please." "Giuseppe." Fabio didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "Leave." The manager's eyes darted between us, then to Alberto, who still hadn't moved. Still hadn't looked away from me. "Sir, I can assure you that our staff—" "Leave." Giuseppe backed away so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. The restaurant had gone graveyard silent. No one was eating. No one was pretending not to watch. Even the pianist had stopped playing, hands frozen above the keys. Fabio took a step closer. I could smell his cologne now, expensive, sharp, the kind that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "You have 3 seconds to tell me where you learned that word," he said quietly, "or I'll have you removed." Not gently. My knees threatened to buckle. My vision blurred at the edges. But then, Alberto moved. Just his hand. Lifting from the table, trembling violently, fingers splayed. A silent command that held more authority than any shout. Stop. Fabio froze mid-step. His jaw clenched, but he didn't advance. The security guard who'd been moving toward me from the left stopped cold, hand still hovering near his jacket. Alberto's gaze hadn't left my face. Up close, I could see the lines carved deep around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair, the weight of decades pressing down on his shoulders. When he spoke, his voice cracked. Where did you learn that word? Not how. Not why. Where? Like the geography of it mattered more than the act itself. I swallowed hard. My throat felt lined with glass. My voice came out broken, barely audible. I can't answer him. Fabio's tone had shifted. Still cold, but now laced with something else. Confusion. Maybe even concern. Now. Alberto raised his hand higher, more forcefully this time. Fabio went silent. Where? Alberto asked again, softer now. His eyes glistened in the low light. Please. The word shattered something inside me. Please. When was the last time anyone had asked me for anything instead of demanding it? I couldn't tell him everything. Couldn't explain the jewelry box, the hidden photo, the nights my mother cried herself to sleep whispering names in Sicilian that I couldn't understand. But I could give him this one truth. My mother taught me. The words hung in the air like smoke. Alberto's face crumpled. Not dramatically. Not like in movies. Just a subtle collapse. The kind that happens when a man who spent decades building walls suddenly remembers why he built them in the first place. His hand dropped to the table, gripping the edge hard enough that his knuckles went white. Your mother, he whispered. What was? He stopped. Breathed. Tried again. What was her name? Across from him, Fabio had gone completely still. His expression shifted from anger to something I couldn't read. Something almost like fear. I met Alberto's eyes. Lucia Tapia. For a moment nothing happened. Then Alberto's breath caught. Sharp, painful, like he'd been shot. He pushed his chair back. The screech of wood against marble echoed through the restaurant. Somewhere behind me someone gasped. Alberto braced both hands on the table, arms shaking with the effort. And slowly, with visible difficulty, the patriarch of the Romano family began to stand. Alberto didn't stand. His arms straightened, pushing against the table for leverage, his whole body trembling with the effort. I thought he was rising to his full height, thought maybe he was about to leave, to walk away from whatever ghost I just dragged into the light. But then his knees bent. Not up. Down. The sound that escaped my throat wasn't quite a word. More like a break in the universe, a small death of understanding. Because Alberto Romano, the man whose name made politicians sweat and rivals disappear, whose empire stretched from Sicily to Milan and beyond, was lowering himself to the restaurant floor. In front of me. The gasp started at the closest tables and rippled outward like a stone thrown into still water. A woman's fork clattered against her plate. Someone's chair scraped back violently. A waiter stumbled, catching himself against the wall. Papa. Fabio's voice cracked on the word. Not angry. Not commanding. Terrified. He lunged forward, reaching for his father's arm, but Alberto shook him off with a sharp jerk of his shoulder. The old man's knees hit the marble with a dull thud that made me flinch. He knelt there, head bowed, hands pressed flat against his thighs. The entire restaurant had stopped breathing. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. My vision tunneled until all I could see was the silver crown of his head, the tremor in his shoulders, the impossible reality of a king humbling himself before a waitress. Papa, get up. Fabio's hand hovered over Alberto's shoulder but didn't touch. Like he was afraid to. Like the rules of the world had suddenly changed and he didn't know which ones still applied. No. Alberto's voice rang out, steady despite the shake in his body. Louder than I'd heard him speak all night. Loud enough that everyone heard. He lifted his head. His eyes were wet. There is a debt, he said, each word deliberate, carved from something deep and old. A debt that has gone unpaid for 40 years. The silence that followed felt sacred, terrible. I was young, reckless, bleeding in a ditch with soldiers hunting me like an animal. His accent thickened, Sicilian roots breaking through the polished Italian. A woman found me. She should have let me die, should have turned me in and collected the bounty on my head. My chest tightened. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. But she didn't. Alberto's voice cracked. She hid me, fed me, lied to men with guns to protect a stranger who had no right to her mercy. Someone behind me was crying. I could hear the soft, muffled sounds. I swore an oath to her, a blood oath, that I would repay her sacrifice with my life if necessary. He paused, breath-shuddering. And then I left. I built an empire. I had power, money, respect. His hands curled into fists against his thighs. And I forgot. The word hit like a confession, like a blade. I forgot the woman who saved me. I let her die in poverty while I lived in palaces. I broke the most sacred vow a man can make. A sob caught in my throat. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to hold it in, but it came anyway, quiet, broken, unstoppable. Alberto looked up at me fully now, tears streaming freely down his weathered face. She died believing I had no honor, he whispered, and the rawness in his voice made something inside me shatter. But you carry her memory. You speak the words she must have taught you. You came here, whether you knew it or not, to collect a debt I can never repay. He reached out one shaking hand, palm up, offering something invisible. Her name was Lucia Tapia, he said, voice breaking on each syllable. And I failed her. I couldn't hold it anymore. The tears came in waves, hot and blinding. My knees buckled, and I barely caught myself on the edge of the table. The order pad slipped from my hand, hitting the floor with a soft thud. I'm sorry, Alberto whispered. I'm so sorry. Fabio stood frozen, staring at his father like he'd never seen him before. His face had gone pale, jaw slack, eyes wide with something beyond shock. This was his father, the man who'd taught him power, ruthlessness, control. Kneeling, weeping, human. The moment stretched impossibly long. A photograph burned into the collective memory of everyone present. Phones were probably out by now, recording, capturing, broadcasting. Then Fabio moved. Not toward his father. Toward the room. Everyone out. His voice cut through the silence like a whip crack. Now. When no one moved fast enough, he shouted it. Out. Sicily. 1984. The night smelled of blood and burnt olive wood. Alberto Romano was 23 years old and dying in a ditch. The bullet had gone clean through his side, just below the ribs, but the knife wound in his thigh wouldn't stop bleeding. He'd tied his belt around it an hour ago. Maybe two, time had stopped meaning anything. But the leather was soaked through now, dripping into the dirt beneath him. Above, the stars blurred and doubled. His father's voice echoed in his head, the last thing he'd heard before the ambush. Trust no one. The moment you show weakness, you're dead. He'd shown weakness. He was dead. His vision narrowed to a tunnel of black creeping inward from the edges. Somewhere in the distance, dogs barked. Soldiers, probably. Or rivals. Didn't matter. Either way, they were coming to finish what the bullet had started. Good, he thought distantly. Let it end. Then he heard footsteps. Not boots. Too light. Soft soles against dry grass. He tried to reach for the pistol at his hip, but his arm wouldn't obey. His fingers twitched uselessly against the ground. A woman's face appeared above him, haloed by moonlight. Dark hair pulled back. Wide eyes. Young, maybe younger than him. She wore an apron stained with flour and carried a bucket of kitchen scraps. She froze when she saw him. For a long moment they stared at each other, the wounded enforcer and the farm girl who'd stumbled onto something she couldn't unsee. "Vatine," he rasped. "Go. You didn't see me." But she didn't run. She crouched beside him, eyes moving over the blood-soaked clothes, the weapons, the tattoo on his forearm that marked him as one of them. The men her village feared. The men who collected debts in bone and ash. "Your Romano family," she whispered. Not a question. He nodded once, barely. She should have left him there. Should have walked back to her farmhouse and locked the door and pretended the ditch was empty. Instead, Lucia Tapia reached down and pressed her hand against his bleeding side. "Can you walk?" She hid him in the cellar beneath the kitchen, behind crates of wine and sacks of grain. The space was tight, damp, smelling of earth and fermentation. She cleaned his wounds with water boiled on the stove, packed them with torn strips of her own bedsheets. He tried to speak, to ask why, but she pressed a finger to her lips. "My father's upstairs. He can't know." So Alberto learned silence. Days blurred together. She brought him food after midnight. Bread, cheese, sometimes soup still warm from dinner. She changed his bandages while he bit down on leather to keep from screaming. She never asked his name. Never asked what he'd done to earn a bullet and a blade. But she knew. He could see it in the way her hands shook the first few nights, in the careful distance she maintained, in the small crucifix she touched before descending the stairs each time. She knew exactly what kind of monster she was protecting. On the 8th night, the soldiers came. Alberto heard them before he saw them. Boots on the dirt road, voices barking commands in Italian and broken Sicilian. He pressed himself against the cellar wall, breathing through his teeth, hand wrapped around the knife Lucia had left him. If they found him, she died too. That was the rule. Above, the door crashed open. Heavy footsteps. Furniture scraping. Lucia's voice, high and frightened, answering questions Alberto couldn't quite hear. "Have you seen anyone? Anyone injured? Anyone hiding?" "No, sir. Just me and my father. We don't involve ourselves." "We're searching anyway." Alberto's grip tightened on the knife. His wounds had barely closed. He'd last maybe 30 seconds in a fight. But he wouldn't let them take her without trying. The cellar door creaked open. Light spilled down the stairs. Footsteps descended. Slow, deliberate, suspicious. Alberto pressed deeper into the shadows, every muscle coiled. A soldier appeared at the bottom of the stairs, flashlight sweeping the cramped space. The beam passed over crates, grain sacks, wine barrels. It stopped 3 inches from Alberto's hiding spot. "Niente," the soldier called up. "Nothing." Then Lucia's voice, trembling but clear. "I told you. We're just farmers." The soldier hesitated, swept the light one more time. then climbed back up. The door closed. Alberto waited in the darkness, heart hammering, until Lucia returned hours later. She didn't speak, just pressed a bundle into his hands. Clean clothes, bread, a small leather pouch of coins. "You have to leave tonight," she whispered. "They'll come back." He stared at her. This girl who'd risked everything for nothing. For a man whose family had probably collected tribute from hers. Who'd lied to soldiers who could have shot her on sight. Why? The word came out broken. "Why did you?" "Because you're someone's son," she said simply. "And I couldn't watch you die." Alberto's throat closed. He reached for her hand, gripped it hard, and spoke the words his father had taught him. The old words, the sacred ones, the vow that couldn't be broken. Contentizza. Gratitude bound by blood. "I owe you my life. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, it's yours. I swear it." Lucia pulled her hand back gently. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "Just survive. And be better than what they say you are." He left before dawn. The last thing he saw was her silhouette in the kitchen window, watching him disappear into the hills. He never came back. Present day. Milan. Fabio Romano stood in the now empty restaurant, staring at his father still kneeling on the marble floor, at the trembling waitress clutching a table for support. And he understood. The empire he'd inherited, the power, the legacy, the respect his name commanded, all of it stood on a foundation of this. A broken promise. A forgotten woman. A debt that should have been paid 40 years ago. His father had built everything on blood and fear and ruthless calculation. But he'd started with a lie. "Get up, Papa," Fabio said quietly, moving forward at last. "Please." But Alberto didn't move. "Not yet," the old man whispered. "Not until she forgives me." Fabio looked at Annie, this shy, invisible girl who'd just shattered everything he thought he knew, and realized she held more power in this moment than his entire family combined. The private dining room smelled of leather and old wine. Fabio had cleared it himself, dismissing even his own security with a sharp gesture. Now it was just the three of us, him standing by the window, Alberto sitting in a chair someone had brought for him, and me pressed against the far wall like I could disappear into the mahogany paneling. "Sit." Fabio didn't look at me when he spoke. His voice was controlled again, the crack from earlier sealed over with ice. I didn't move. I said sit. Still controlled. Still cold. But something beneath it now, something sharp and desperate. Alberto stirred in his chair. "Fabio, I'm handling this. By terrorizing her. By getting answers." Fabio finally turned to face me. His expression was unreadable. No anger, no warmth. Just a blank calculation that somehow felt worse than rage. "How much do you want?" I blinked. "What? Money. That's why you're here, isn't it? Why you learned that word, why you approached my father. You knew who we were. You knew he'd react." He tilted his head slightly. "So how much to make this disappear?" The words hit me like cold water. He thought this was a con. A shakedown. That I'd orchestrated some elaborate scheme to extract payment from a guilty old man. "I don't want your money," I said quietly. "Everyone wants money." He pulled out his phone, thumbs moving across the screen. "I can have 100,000 euros transferred to your account within the hour. More if you need it. All you have to do is walk out that door and never speak of this again." "Fabio, stop." Alberto tried to stand, but his legs buckled. He caught himself on the armrest, breathing hard. I should have been afraid. Should have been calculating, grateful, smart enough to take whatever he offered and run. Instead, I felt nothing but a hollow, aching sadness. She died in a one-room apartment in Palermo, I said. Lung disease from cleaning chemicals. She worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford the medication that might have saved her. Fabio's thumb paused on the screen. She never asked anyone for help. Never told anyone about the man she'd saved or the oath he'd sworn. She just... My voice cracked. She just died. Alone. Poor. Forgotten. The phone lowered slowly. And you? I looked at Alberto, then back to Fabio. You built palaces. The silence stretched so thin it felt like it might snap. Fabio's jaw worked. His free hand curled into a fist at his side. Then released. Curled again. My father built this empire from nothing, he said. But the conviction had drained from his voice. He survived when others didn't. He earned. He survived because of her. The words came out harder than I intended. Everything you have, everything you are, exists because a poor farm girl decided your father's life was worth more than her own safety. You don't understand. I understand that she saved a monster and died believing he had no honor. The word hung between us like a blade. Honor. The foundation everything in their world was built on. The code that justified violence, commanded loyalty, separated them from common criminals. And it was broken. Fabio stared at me, and for the first time since this started, I saw past the ice. Saw the man beneath the Mafia Boss, younger than he seemed, maybe 30 at most, carrying a weight he'd inherited and never questioned. His empire was built on blood and fear and strategic ruthlessness. But it started with a lie. What do you want? He asked again, quieter now. Not an offer. A genuine question. Like he couldn't compute a world where I didn't have an angle. I don't know, I admitted. The truth of it made my chest tight. I didn't come here for this. I didn't even know you'd be here tonight. I stopped. Swallowed. Started again. I found her journals after she died. Pages and pages about the man she'd saved. About the oath he'd sworn. About watching the newspapers for his name and seeing him rise while she fell. My hands were shaking again. She never blamed him. That's what killed me. She just hoped. Until she couldn't anymore. Alberto made a sound. Low, broken animal. Fabio's face had gone pale. Papa. Listen to her. Alberto's voice cut through the room like thunder. Not weak anymore. Not trembling. The voice of the man who'd built an empire. You want answers? You want to fix this? Then listen. Fabio went rigid. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. Pride versus legacy. Fear versus shame. The battle played out across his face in real time. Finally, he looked at me again. Really looked. Not at a problem to be solved or a threat to be neutralized. At a person. Tell me about her, he said hoarsely. Your mother. Tell me who she was. Before I could answer, the door burst open. Fabio's head of security, a man who'd been dismissed 20 minutes ago, stood in the doorway, phone in hand, face grim. Sir, we have a problem. Fabio's expression shuddered instantly. I gave explicit orders. News vans. 3 of them. Outside the main entrance. The security chief's eyes flicked to me, then back to Fabio. Someone filmed it. The kneeling. It's already online. The color drained from Fabio's face. How many views? 500,000. In the last 15 minutes. The room seemed to tilt. Footage is everywhere, the man continued. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. They're calling it, he hesitated, then pushed forward. The Mafia Boss who knelt. Fabio turned slowly toward the window. Through the glass I could see lights. Bright, intrusive, multiplying. Camera lights. They want a statement, his security chief said. The press. They want to know who she is. What happened? Why Alberto Romano knelt to a waitress. Fabio stood frozen, staring at the gathering storm outside. And I realized with sudden, terrible clarity. This wasn't private anymore. The whole world was watching. The video had a life of its own. By midnight, it had 3 million views. By dawn, 15 million. Hashtag Mafia Kneeling trended worldwide. Hashtag Alberto Romano climbed to number 2 in Italy, number 7 globally. News outlets from Rome to New York ran segments with the same breathless headline. Mafia patriarch kneels to unknown waitress. What does she know? I watched it happen from the windowless back office of the restaurant. Fabio's security team forming a human wall between me and the cameras outside. My phone, confiscated within minutes, sat on the desk in front of Fabio, screen illuminating his face in the darkroom as he scrolled through an endless feed of speculation. Some posts called it romantic. Others called it a coup. Most called it impossible. Who is she? What does she have on him? This is the beginning of the end for the Romano family. Fabio's phone buzzed. Again. And again. He'd stopped answering after the 40th call. They're saying you're my mistress, he said without looking up, voice flat. That you're carrying my child. That you have evidence of crimes my father committed 50 years ago. That you're an undercover agent. I sat very still in the chair they'd placed me in. I'm none of those things. I know. He finally looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with shadows. But they don't. The door opened. Alberto entered, moving slowly but steadier than before. Someone had brought him a cane. He waved off the security guard trying to help him and lowered himself into a chair with a wince. How bad? He asked. Catastrophic. Fabio turned the phone around, showing his father a Twitter thread with hundreds of replies. Marcello's crew is already making moves. They see weakness. 3 of our partners have called requesting emergency meetings. He air-quoted the words with barely controlled rage. 2 shipments have been delayed. Our accounts in Switzerland have been flagged for unusual activity. Someone's digging. Let them dig, Alberto said quietly. Fabio stared at him. Let them. Papa, we're exposed. Everything we've built is built on a lie. Alberto's voice hardened. I knelt because I owed a debt. I knelt because it was right. If that destroys us, then we deserved to be destroyed. The words landed like stones in still water. Fabio's hands curled into fists on the desk. You don't understand what you've done. The moment we show weakness, real weakness, not the calculated kind, we're finished. Marcello will move. The Calabrians will move. Even our own people will start choosing sides. Then let them. You want a war. I want the truth. Alberto leaned forward, cane gripped tight. For 40 years I've lived with this. Every success, every victory, every empire I built, all of it poisoned by what I failed to do. His voice broke slightly. I won't die carrying that shame. Not when I can finally make it right. Fabio turned away, jaw working. I could see the calculations running behind his eyes, the risks, the angles, the cost of every possible choice. If I go public, he said slowly, if I tell them the truth, we become vulnerable in ways we've never been before. Every rival, every prosecutor, every journalist will come for us. You understand that? Yes. They'll dig into everything. Find things we'd rather keep buried. I know. We could lose it all. Alberto met his son's gaze. Then we lose it. But we lose it with honor intact. Fabio laughed. Sharp, bitter, disbelieving. Honor. You're asking me to sacrifice our empire for honor. I'm asking you to be better than I was. The silence that followed felt infinite. I watched Fabio struggle with it, the weight of legacy pressing down on him from one side, the cold logic of survival from the other. Everything he'd been taught said, protect the family, eliminate threats, never show weakness. But his father was asking him to do the opposite, to be vulnerable, publicly. She needs protection, Fabio said finally, not quite answering. If we go public, she becomes a target. Every enemy we have will see her as leverage. Then protect her, Alberto said simply. For how long? A week? A month? Forever? Fabio's voice rose. You're asking me to tie our family's safety to a waitress we didn't even know existed yesterday. I'm asking you to honor my debt. Your debt isn't mine. It is now. Alberto slammed his cane against the floor. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. The moment that video went viral, it became yours. You can either own it or run from it. But you cannot erase it. Fabio stood frozen, breathing hard. Outside, I could hear the muffled chaos. Shouted questions, camera shutters, the low rumble of the growing crowd. They weren't leaving. They'd stay until they got answers. Or blood. What do you want from me? Fabio asked, and I couldn't tell if he was talking to his father or to me or to the universe itself. Alberto rose slowly, leaning heavy on the cane. He crossed to his son and placed one weathered hand on Fabio's shoulder. I want you to do what I couldn't, he said softly. Tell the truth. Say her name. Let the world know that the Romano family pays its debts, even 40 years late. Fabio closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had shifted. The calculation was still there, the strategic mind that had kept him alive this long. But beneath it now, acceptance. Maybe even resignation. If I do this, he said quietly, everything changes. You understand that. We can't go back. I don't want to go back. Fabio looked at me for a long moment. I saw him weighing me, not as a threat or a pawn, but as a person whose life was about to be shredded by forces beyond her control. I'll need you to trust me, he said. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. He picked up his phone, typed something quickly, hit send. 30 seconds later, his head of security entered. Set up a press conference, Fabio said, voice steady now. Tomorrow morning. Piazza del Duomo. I want every major outlet notified. The security chief's eyes widened. Sir, are you? I'm going public. Full disclosure. Fabio's jaw set. The world wants to know who she is and why my father knelt. I'm going to tell them. Alberto exhaled slowly. Relief and pride and fear all tangled together. The security chief hesitated. Sir, with all respect, this could end us. I know. Fabio met the man's eyes. Do it anyway. The security chief nodded once and left. In the silence that followed, Fabio turned back to the window. The camera lights had multiplied. The crowd had grown. Tomorrow it would be even bigger. I hope your mother's memory is worth this, he said without turning around. The words should have been cruel. Instead, they just sounded tired. It is, I whispered. Fabio nodded slowly, and I realized he was about to do something his family had never done before. Choose honor over power, even if it destroyed him. Piazza del Duomo at dawn looked like a battlefield before the first shot. News vans ringed the square. Satellite dishes pointed skyward like weapons. Cameras formed a semicircle around the makeshift podium, lenses glinting in the early light. Reporters jockeyed for position, voices overlapping in a dozen languages. Behind them, a crowd had gathered. Hundreds of people holding phones, recording, waiting. I stood 20 feet back from the podium, flanked by two of Fabio's security team. Alberto sat in a chair beside me, cane across his lap, watching his son prepare to do the impossible. Fabio stood at the microphone, shoulders squared, face unreadable. He wore a black suit, no tie, looking every inch the man his reputation claimed he was. But I could see the tension in his jaw, the white-knuckle grip on the podium's edge. He was terrified. The crowd hushed as he leaned forward. My name is Fabio Romano. His voice carried across the square, steady despite everything. Most of you know who I am, what my family represents, the power we hold. Cameras flashed. Phones rose higher. What you don't know, he continued, is that everything we are, everything we've built, exists because of one woman's mercy. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Fabio's hands relaxed slightly on the podium. 43 years ago, my father was a young man caught in the violence that consumed Sicily. He was wounded, hunted, left to die in a ditch outside a farmhouse. The square had gone silent. Even the journalists had stopped whispering. A woman found him. She had every reason to let him die, or worse, turn him in. His family's reputation was already known. Feared. She knew what he was. Fabio paused, breathing carefully. But she saved him anyway. I felt Alberto's hand find mine, squeezing once. Her name was Lucia Tapia. Fabio spoke it clearly, forcefully, like a declaration. She hid my father for weeks, fed him, protected him when soldiers came searching. She risked execution for a stranger who had no claim to her mercy. The weight of the name hung in the morning air. Before he left, my father swore a blood oath, the kind our people hold sacred. He promised to repay the debt, to honor her sacrifice. Fabio's voice dropped, heavy with something that might have been shame. He never did. A collective intake of breath. My father built an empire. He rose to power. He had wealth, influence, respect. Fabio's knuckles went white again. And Lucia Tapia died poor, forgotten, believing the oath she'd been given meant nothing. Someone in the crowd gasped. A reporter whispered urgently into a phone. 2 nights ago, her daughter, Annie Tapia, came to my father's table as a waitress. She spoke one word. One ancient Sicilian word that shouldn't have existed outside our bloodline. He looked back at me briefly, and my father understood what he'd spent 40 years trying to forget. Fabio straightened, facing the cameras fully now. He knelt, not because she demanded it, Not because she threatened him, but because she carried the weight of a debt he'd never paid. Because she deserved the acknowledgement her mother never received. The crowd erupted, shouted questions, flashing cameras, chaos barely contained by the security barrier. Fabio raised one hand. Silence crashed back down. I stand here today to say publicly what should have been said decades ago. The Romano family owes everything to Lucia Tapia. Our empire, our legacy, our very existence. All of it stands on the foundation of her courage. He turned, extending his hand toward me. Annie Tapia. Would you join me? My legs didn't want to move. Alberto's hand pressed gently against my back, urging me forward. I walked to the podium on numb feet, the cameras tracking every step. The crowd noise rose again. Questions, speculation, the roar of curiosity desperate to be fed. Fabio stepped aside, giving me space at the microphone. Miss Tapia, a reporter shouted. What do you want from the Romano family? The question hung there, loaded with assumption. Money. Power. Revenge. I looked out at the sea of faces, the cameras, the world watching and waiting for me to name my price. Nothing, I said quietly. The word echoed across the square through speakers I hadn't noticed. Nothing. The reporter pressed. They've offered you compensation? They have. And you refused? Yes. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Fabio stood very still beside me, watching. Then what do you want? Another voice called out. I looked at Fabio, at Alberto sitting in his chair, tears streaming silently down his weathered face. I want the truth to live, I said. I want my mother's name remembered. Not as charity, not as scandal, but as what it was, an act of mercy that changed history. The cameras clicked frantically. Someone was crying in the crowd. That's all? A journalist asked, disbelief thick in her voice. That's everything. Fabio stepped back to the microphone, clearing his throat. Miss Tapia has asked for nothing but acknowledgement, he said. But that doesn't absolve us. It doesn't erase the debt. He paused, jaw working. Which is why I'm announcing today that the Romano family will be making permanent changes to how we operate. The square went deadly quiet. Even the other journalists stopped shouting. We will be establishing the Lucia Tapia Foundation, Fabio continued, voice gaining strength, dedicated to supporting families in poverty, the people our world has historically exploited. We will be ending several of our operations that prey on the vulnerable. A man in an expensive suit at the edge of the crowd, one of Marcello's people, I realized, went pale. And we will be cooperating with authorities to ensure that future generations of my family do not repeat the failures of the past. Chaos erupted. Reporters screamed questions. The crowd surged forward. Fabio's security closed ranks immediately, forming a wall. But through it all, I heard one journalist's question cut through the noise. Are you dismantling the Romano Empire? Fabio's eyes found mine for just a moment. Something passed between us, understanding maybe, or just exhausted resignation. He turned back to the microphone. I'm rebuilding it, he said quietly, on a foundation that won't crumble under the weight of forgotten debts. And just like that, everything changed. 3 months later, the community center opened in Palermo. It stood in the neighborhood where my mother had died, a gleaming structure of glass and light where an abandoned warehouse had once rotted. Above the entrance, carved in marble, Centro Comunitario Lucia Tapia. I stood beside Alberto at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, scissors trembling in my hand. The crowd that gathered wasn't press this time. It was neighbors. Families. Children who'd play in the rooms my mother's name now protected. She would have hated the attention, I whispered to Alberto. He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. He'd aged in the months since the press conference. Moved slower, spoke softer, like something inside him had finally been allowed to rest. She would have loved the purpose, he replied. I cut the ribbon. The applause that followed felt different than the chaos of Piazza del Duomo. Warmer. Real. That night, I handed in my apron at Osteria del Vento. The manager, Giuseppe, who'd nearly fainted when the Romanos arrived, tried to convince me to stay. You're famous now, he said. People ask about you. They want to meet the girl who... I'm not that girl anymore, I interrupted gently. He looked confused. Then who are you? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I couldn't find it while pouring wine for people who saw me as a story instead of a person. I enrolled at the University of Palermo 2 weeks later. Linguistics and Cultural Preservation. The admissions officer had recognized my name immediately, but I'd asked her to process my application like anyone else's. She'd smiled. Your essay about endangered Sicilian dialects was exceptional. You didn't need your name. Maybe not. But it felt good to hear anyway. Fabio's transformation was messier. The Lucia Tapia Foundation became operational within a month. Faster than anyone thought possible. But dismantling the violent machinery his family had built for generations? That took longer. And cost more. The first test came from Marcello's crew. They hit one of the Romano legitimate businesses, a shipping company in Naples, thinking Fabio had gone soft. 3 trucks burned. 2 warehouses ransacked. The old Fabio would have retaliated with overwhelming force. Bodies in the harbor. Businesses burned to the ground. A message written in blood. Instead, he called the police. The criminal world watched in disbelief as Fabio Romano handed over evidence, cooperated with investigations, and let the legal system handle what he'd once handled with violence. You're weak, Marcello had sneered during their one face-to-face meeting, arranged on neutral ground. Your father must be ashamed. Fabio's expression hadn't changed. My father knelt in front of a waitress. If you think that's weakness, you've already lost. Marcello had tried twice more to provoke a war. Both times, Fabio refused to engage with the old methods. The second time, Marcello's own people started questioning whether fighting the Romanos was worth it anymore. There was no profit in battling someone who wouldn't fight back the traditional way. But it wasn't pacifism. Fabio fought with lawyers instead of soldiers, seized assets instead of territory, built alliances with reformed organizations instead of criminal empires. It was a different kind of power. Slower, quieter, more dangerous to the people who thrived in the old system. They're calling you the reformed Don, I told him during one of our weekly check-ins. He'd insisted on maintaining contact, protection he called it, though I suspected it was more complicated than that. They're calling me worse things too, Fabio said with a dry smile. We sat in his office, the same one where he'd interrogated me months ago. It looked different now, softer somehow, though nothing had physically changed. Traitor. Coward. My father's puppet. Are you a traitor to the old ways? Yes. He leaned back in his chair. A coward? No. This is harder than violence ever was. I studied him. The shadows under his eyes had deepened. He'd lost weight. The cost of transformation was written across his face. Do you regret it? I asked quietly. He was silent for a long moment. Every day, he admitted. And not at all. I found my mother's journals again that winter, reading them with new understanding. She'd written about Alberto, il sopravvissuto, but also about hope. About believing that mercy could change people, even when evidence suggested otherwise. Maybe he forgot she'd written 3 years before her death. Or maybe he's waiting for the right moment. Either way, I don't regret saving him. Some debts are meant to be paid forward, not back. I copied her words carefully into my own journal, then began documenting the Sicilian phrases she'd preserved. The project grew: interviews with elderly speakers, recordings of dying dialects, preservation of words that existed nowhere else. The university gave me a small grant, then a larger one. By spring, I had enough funding to travel throughout Sicily, recording the linguistic heritage my mother had loved. It felt like continuing her work, like honoring her in a way that mattered more than marble and headlines. The call came on a Tuesday in early April. Fabio's voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor underneath. It's my father. His heart. The doctors say. He stopped. Breathed. You should come. He's been asking for you. I caught the first train to Milan. Alberto was in a private room in one of the city's best hospitals. Machines beeping softly. Monitors tracking the slow decline of a man who'd survived bullets and knives but couldn't outrun time. He looked smaller in the hospital bed. Fragile in a way I'd never seen, even when he'd knelt on that restaurant floor. "Annie," he whispered when I entered. His hand reached out, shaking badly. I took it, squeezing gently. "I'm here." His eyes glistened. "Did you see the center? Is it?" "It's beautiful," I said quickly. "They're already planning to expand. The language programs are full. The children," my voice caught. "The children love it." He smiled. A real smile, tired but genuine. "Good," he breathed. "That's good." Outside the room, Fabio stood with his back against the wall, staring at nothing, waiting for the end of an era, and the final chapter of a debt 40 years in the making. Alberto died 3 days later, just after sunrise. But before he did, he gave me one last gift. It was the second night in the hospital. Fabio had gone home to shower and sleep, reluctantly, only after I'd promised to call if anything changed. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Outside the window, Milan glowed in the darkness. Alberto's eyes opened slowly, finding me in the chair beside his bed. "Still here," he whispered, voice paper thin. "Still here," I confirmed. He was quiet for a long moment, just breathing. Then, "I need to tell you something." I leaned closer. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said carefully, each word an effort. "I don't deserve it. What I did, what I failed to do, can't be undone." "Alberto." "Let me finish." He squeezed my hand weakly. "I've spent months thinking about your mother, about the woman she was, the courage it took to hide a monster. You weren't a monster. I became one." His eyes held mine. "But she saw something worth saving anyway. And you," his voice cracked, "you gave me the truth. You could have demanded anything. Money, power, revenge. Instead, you asked only that her story be remembered." Tears blurred my vision. "That's why the debt is paid," he whispered. "Not because of the center or the foundation or any material thing, but because you showed me what your mother tried to teach me 40 years ago." "What's that?" "That mercy isn't weakness. That truth is stronger than empire. That the most powerful thing a person can do is choose honor over survival. His breathing grew shallower. "Thank you," he said. "Not for forgiving me. I don't ask for that. But for giving me truth. For letting me die knowing her name will outlive mine." I couldn't speak. Could only hold his hand and nod. Alberto smiled. Small, peaceful, final. "Contentizza," he breathed. And closed his eyes. The funeral was held at the Basilica di Sant'Ambrogio, a statement as much as a ceremony. Hundreds attended. Politicians. Business leaders. Family members I'd never heard of. The press kept a respectful distance this time, cameras quiet, recording history instead of scandal. I sat in the front row, beside Fabio. It should have felt wrong, a waitress seated among the powerful, honored like family. But Fabio had insisted. "You're the reason he died with peace," he'd said simply. "That makes you family." The priest spoke about legacy and redemption. About a man who'd built an empire but found grace at the end. I barely heard it. Instead, I thought about my mother. About the photo hidden in a jewelry box. About the journals filled with hope and dialect and quiet dignity. About the night she'd chosen mercy over safety. She'd never know what that choice had cost, or what it had ultimately created. But I knew. And now so did the world. After the burial, Fabio found me standing apart from the crowd, staring at the fresh earth. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know." It was the truth. I felt hollowed out, wrung dry, but also strangely light. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. "He left you something," Fabio said quietly, holding out an envelope. Inside was a single photograph. Young Alberto and my mother, standing outside the farmhouse. I'd never seen this one. She was smiling. He looked alive in a way I'd never seen, even in person. On the back, in shaky handwriting, "For Annie. Proof that your mother's mercy saved more than just my life. It saved my soul. A.R." I pressed the photo to my chest, tears coming again. Fabio stood beside me, silent, letting me grieve. "The foundation is growing," he said eventually. "We've opened 2 more centers. There's a waiting list for the language preservation program you started." "That's good. It's not enough." He turned to face me fully. "It will never be enough to repay what your mother did. But we'll keep trying. For as long as the Romano name exists, we'll keep trying." I looked at him. This man who'd been forced to choose between empire and honor, who'd chosen honor despite the cost. "You're different than you were," I said. "So are you." We stood together in the cemetery, surrounded by marble monuments to power and legacy and names that would be forgotten within generations. But my mother's name, carved in community centers, spoken in classrooms, preserved in the dialect she'd loved, would live differently. Not in stone. In people. In change. 6 months later, I defended my thesis on endangered Sicilian dialects. The university auditorium was full. Professors, students, journalists covering the waitress who changed a crime family. But in the back row, sitting quietly, Fabio Romano. He didn't clap louder than anyone else. Didn't make a scene. He just nodded once when our eyes met. An acknowledgement. A promise. A continuation of something that had started with one word whispered in a restaurant. Contentizza. Gratitude bound by blood. A debt that had taken 40 years to repay, and would take generations to fully honor. That night, I stood on my apartment balcony, overlooking Palermo. The city sprawled below, lights twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere down there, children played in a center bearing my mother's name. Students learned words she'd preserved. Families found help she'd once desperately needed. One word. One forgotten woman. One empire changed. My mother had saved a monster in a ditch and asked nothing in return. I'd spoken her truth to power and demanded only that it be remembered. And somehow, impossibly, it had been enough. Because true power doesn't stand on violence or fear or accumulated wealth. True power kneels before truth. And rises transformed. Thanks for watching till the very end. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be dropping another unforgettable story tomorrow, so make sure you don't miss it.